Hi, this is Bereans at the Gate. Welcome to our video blog for April 29th, 2019. Today it is me and Dr. Haymond. We are missing Dr. Wheeler, our erstwhile companion. He is indisposed today, so we will talk. Jeff, you said that you had some economic news that you wanted to talk about. So what's going on with the economy that's worth discussing?
Well, it's not that I have particularly any economic news, but we have been seeing the reports of a continued robust growth in the economy. The GDP number surprised on the upside, and I think that's worth thinking about and talking about and seeing how is this going to translate to the Trump prospects for 2020. There is the significant strategy, clearly, and much to the even the establishment Democrats' chagrin, that the left's base continues to push and allow for the use of the term socialism. And with a robust economy, will the Republicans be able to posture this as something that's a significant risk if you vote Democratic to throw away the success that we're having? I mean, because this GDP number is really, not that it was that large, 3.2%.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how's that historically set? I mean, is that a...
Well, here's the interesting thing about the GDP numbers, as a rough and ready figure, what you typically see, and this has certainly been characterized by the last decade, you have 2% economic growth, and that's okay. You just kind of status quo,
right.
But there's no real wage gains associated with that. You start getting above 3%, that's when the real wage growth starts to happen. And that's what we're seeing right now. So I'll give you some anecdotes as we go along with this as well, but let me kind of finish setting the stage with the GDP numbers. It's not just the GDP number per se, but now we've had a period over certainly the last 5 or so quarters where overall the average is well above 3%. And that's where we're starting to see that in combination with the very, very low unemployment numbers, where there's starting to be significant pressure for workers. Firms simply cannot find labor. So here's an anecdote, and I believe this is relatively representative. I'm out yesterday with one of my friends who's actually a general manager at a multinational firm. He's with one of the subsidiaries within that, but he's a fairly significant manager, and he is telling me they cannot find labor. And it's not entry-level labor per se. It's a little bit skilled, but they can train workers.
Sure.
But his entry-level position right now, and it's up in just a little bit north of here in Ohio, his firm, their entry-level wage is $14.50. If you stay 30 days and don't get fired in 30 days, it's $15.50. So when we talk about a $15 an hour minimum wage, it's kind of already there in a large part of the country. And it's not due legislation. That's kind of the key point. It's rapid economic growth, which will drive these real wage gains in competition for labor. So he's telling me things that they're having to do to start working with some of the homeless shelters for people that they can train. That's exactly what we want to have. We've always said that the best social solution for some of these problems is to give people a job, and the competition for workers forces employers to go lower or to more risky labor pool applicants than they normally would, and that's really potentially transformational. So it's really setting the stage for interesting times ahead.
Let me ask a couple of questions, follow-up. So what does this do with Trump's argument about immigration, right? One of the arguments we hear about immigration is that it takes away jobs from Americans, it makes the labor market tighter, so we want to restrict immigration because of that. It seems like that's a tough argument to make right now, at least as we look at the economy. Is that accurate, or am I being too simplistic?
It is very accurate. However, we shouldn't look at the economy in the aggregate as that's one of the fallacies of macro. When you get a bunch of low-skilled labor, if we're talking about Central America, they're typically going to be on the lower skill end of the labor spectrum. There will be a disproportionate effect, at least in the short run, for workers that would compete against them. But these people don't just provide. They don't just take jobs, they're also additional consumers. So that stimulates demand as well, which creates yet other positions. The long-term effect is very positive, but the short-term effect can be some dislocation. But if there's ever a time to have it, this is the time to do it. Our economy would be growing much more robustly if we had open immigration. And let me explain why. Economic growth, it's just basic economics here. Economic growth comes really from two parts. Number one is the growth in the labor force. And then there's the growth in productivity itself. Well, we have had demographic declines for quite some time. So our growth in the labor force is very anemic right now. And it's what growth we're getting is much more on the productivity side. But imagine if we also had growth in the labor force to be complement that. We could be having the 4% economic growth that Mr. Trump wants.
What about the argument that you hear a lot from especially people on the left side of the spectrum that these kinds of gains are good for only certain kinds of workers? It isn't a widespread economic growth. It's more narrowly targeted to people, as you said, who are already skilled, who are already doing well in the economy. They're really the ones that are benefiting. Now, from what you said so far, it doesn't sound like that's true. But
let me just jump on that.
Yeah.
That's precisely the point. 2% economic growth the previous decade, what we've had, that's good growth for some people. The winners have done very well the previous decade, but the lower spectrum of the workforce were left behind. And now with robust growth, that's driving a lot of these gains to workers that four times had not had that same level of economic growth.
So, I mean, Jeff, you and I remember the Reagan re-election campaign, 1984. Morning in America. And essentially the argument, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? If you are, vote for Reagan. If you're not, go ahead and vote for Mondale or whoever you want to. Are we putting Trump in the position now where he can credibly make this argument that most Americans can say they're better off now than they were before Trump came into the White House?
Yeah, I think from an economic standpoint, no doubt, if the economy holds up. And there's a couple of things going on here. As you know, and our readers and viewers know, I'm more bearish than most because there's other headwinds we're not really talking about.
Right.
But Mr. Trump can accurately say he's had a tighter monetary policy environment than certainly Mr. Obama had.
Yeah.
Now, I disagree with him for what he said against the Fed, and I in any case, though, he's absolutely right. The economy would be growing even faster aside from that. And he's also had the self-inflicted wounds of this trade deal.
Right.
If he'll just get that done, Mr. Dealmaker, he'll have that will be a big boom for him going forward. But there are risks. I mean, China has its own bubble that could burst at any time. And likewise, we have been fairly accommodative with our monetary policy. That could turn south. And so there are headwinds that could, but if the current trends continue, then absolutely he can make that case. The problem then is has his other kind of actions led people to say, well, I'm so concerned about the America in general that my material well-being isn't. Yeah.
That's right. They won't act based on the pocketbook with something else.
Good.
So again, I'm being very simplistic about it. You're the economist, but President Trump's victory in 2016 was somewhat driven by his success in the Midwest, places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and even coming close in places like Minnesota and others where he really had a good push. It seems like what you're saying is the kinds of workers in those areas that were maybe most drawn to President Trump are getting the benefit from this economy in a way they haven't before, which might make his argument with them even better, which makes him an even stronger candidate in 2020 than he was in 2016. Does that sound feasible?
You know, it does, but you could play it the other side.
Of course.
You know, those people that may have had a historical, predilection to vote Democratic, and now that they have a good job and things are going pretty well, they might think, well, I'm okay. You know,
revert back to the norm.
I don't need to. So
that makes sense. So last thing here for a couple minutes. You're familiar with a lot of the ways that political scientists and social scientists, economists model large-scale events. And so if you look back to 2016, the academic literature, actually the people who modeled the 2016 campaign based on macro factors, like incumbency, economic conditions, things like that, they predicted President Trump was going to win. They predicted a generic Republican would win. Trump happened to be the generic Republican. Those models were closest to accurate from what we can tell. From what I know now, those models are showing President Trump winning in a landslide in 2020. That we're looking at something, a significant victory that he would have that would really make him difficult, any Democrat have a difficult time defeating him. If that happens, if we thought the world was turned upside down in 2016, a reelected President Trump, the implications of that I think are fairly staggering.
I agree with you. I don't see a landslide Trump. I do see Trump win if the current trends hold and if the Democrats insist on going far left as they've gone. I think that enables people that would be concerned, because I still believe that a lot of the Trump support was hold your nose, he's much better than the opposition.
Yeah.
The Democrats, if they do their current trend, are suggesting they may give "I've got to hold my nose" yet again.
Yeah.
That said, I think that the strong economic performance and he has taken care, as we have talked about. Mr. Trump has been fairly faithful to take care of the promises that he made to his base, even on immigration, where he has not really pushed when he had the opportunity. He's made the overtures to look as if he's doing that. He's taking care of conservative Christians. He's taking care of Union Democrats. He's taking care of those constituencies. So I think he's in good shape there for those people to continue. It's just hard for me to see that changing if we have a far left candidate and if the economy stays whole. If the Democrats run a much more centrist candidate, then that could change. Howard Schultz, if he were the Democratic nominee instead of an incumbent or an independent, or if the economy tanks, because I think some of those Trump negatives will still be there.
Now, I don't want to steal thunder. You said you've been working on a blog post potentially on the emergence of Pete Buttigieg. He's now polling in third from what I can see, at least in some polls, for the Democratic nomination. For those of you who don't know, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. I don't know, how old is he? I don't even remember how old he is.
He looks mid-30s.
Yeah, he's young. He's quite young.
Well, he must be over than 35.
Older than 35, yeah. Yeah, quite young. Now surging into third place. It looks like wiping out people like Beto and others who really aren't getting any traction. Sure. He's presented an interesting discussion point, I think, especially for Christians. He's arguing that as a Christian himself, that we should be tolerant of him. He's, of course, openly gay. He has a husband. He's used sort of Mike Pence as his foil to some extent, and I think successfully, at least politically, used Mike Pence. I don't think it's an accurate charge that he's labeled against him, but you're working on a post, so I don't want you to just throw all the jewels out there. But what are the things that are percolating in your mind as you think about his candidacy?
Well, what I'm thinking about, and I'm working on another post that's been preceding that one, but I think the interesting thing is his attraction is in large part due to the fact that he is gay and he is a outspoken Christian. Those two. I think there's a large segment of the Democratic Party that doesn't want to be perceived as being hostile to Christianity, even if they don't want to embrace it. And the idea of a Christianity that does not act judgmentally against the values that they want to say, they could get along with that. In the identity politics of the Democratic Party, you have to have something. Where else could a white male have hope?
That's right. That's exactly
but be
right.
interesting in something like this. And so regardless of whether you think homosexuality might be a disqualifying offense, should it be the qualifying factor? And that's what's interesting on this nature is it seems as if that is what is making him a more attractive candidate. For instance, he actually has a pretty good resume in terms. I mean, he's a military veteran, Rhodes Scholar, all this. But what has he done? What policy as a mayor would you think would qualify you as a presidential candidate? Now we've talked, and you've talked about this before.
Absolutely.
We've long left the part where a presidential candidate is present because of experience, and rather so it's the public persona and the image that you portray. What image does he portray besides being gay and Christian that would make him qualified to be the president?
In his defense, he's extremely well spoken. He's articulate.
He is.
He's compelling, I think, as an orator for the most part.
He embraced capitalism, so I like him for that.
And I think on some issues he's not quite as far left than the other candidates that are running. Now he's not a centrist, but he's certainly not a socialist. He's not in the Ocasio-Cortez camp or the Bernie Sanders camp at all. So I think he could provide a plausible alternative to the Democrats. But I agree with you. I mean, I think he's disqualified just based on the lack of experience. I'd have a very hard time supporting him in any capacity based on just experience alone. Where this gets to be sort of personal, I think, for us is when you, as people who criticize Mr. Trump and who wanted to hold him to a higher standard, even for his sexual choices, where we criticized him publicly for his lack of fidelity and other things. And people make mistakes, really his lack of even asking for forgiveness or recognizing there's a problem with it. That's really the issue, I think, for me. If you're going to criticize Mr. Trump, you need to be criticizing Mr. Buttigieg and back and forth. You have to be consistent.
Vice versa. Yeah,
Either we're looking at a consistent standard where there's a biblical definition of sexual activity that's acceptable or not. We can't just simply say, well, this one we're going to give a pass on because we like him politically, that one we're going to attack because of his sexuality. So I recognize there's some differences at work there that should be discussed, but as a general principle, we should just be consistent across the board on this. And so when some Christian conservatives have tried to defend Mr. Trump and attack Buttigieg, it comes off as let's say inconsistent at best, and maybe at worst unchristlike sometimes. That's going to be tough. But I think he's a formidable candidate. I'd really encourage him, not that he's going to listen to me, I'd encourage him to go run for a lower level office in Indiana, become a senator, become governor, spend 4 years, begin 6 years a representative, spend 4 years, 6 years, 8 years building up his resume. Then he'd be in a position to argue credibly he could take on this job and do well with it. Right now, I would not want a former mayor as the president. That's it. I just wouldn't want it. But as you said, we're no longer using those qualifications.
To be fair, I could be open to former mayor being the president. But I would have to say, okay, what's the accomplishment and so forth. So I was pretty excited a couple years ago. I heard the mayor of, and I forget the gentleman's name, but from Tampa Bay, I think it was. He'd done a lot of. I'm sorry for not remembering. We'll find it. We'll post it on the blog in the comments. But he'd done a lot of work to revitalize, as a conservative Republican, minority areas of his city, and was overwhelmingly reelected with broad-based support. And that was the kind of transformational kind of thing at a major city that I was attracted to. And naturally, being a conservative, to have conservative solutions for the downtrodden, I really love that.
I can see that.
I wish someone like him, and we'll find the name and I'll get it, because he's not in politics anymore, but he was very popular at the time.
I would echo that to a degree, but the foreign policy elements would be really waiting for me. I mean, Article 2 gives the president wide discretion on foreign policy. That would be troubling for me. But
I mean,
I know.
Mr. Trump. And seriously though, I mean, even on that, I spent a year at a foreign policy division at a premier think tank.
Yeah.
That does not make me qualified to be president.
Sure.
But it would, if I were to have good advisors, then you could do it. So I think it really depends on who they surround themselves. I'm more concerned about temperament and judgment than practical experience. I don't think we need a George H.W. Bush experience set to be effective in the future. But your point is well made. If they don't have that experience, they at least ought to show some temperament and these other things that would make us feel comfortable.
Some track record. That
something.
I agree.
Okay, what has he done? Rather than, well, I was just mayor and I'm gay and Christian, so that means vote for me. Really?
Yeah.
What more is there?
Yeah.
So
it's interesting, and I think he's gonna be sticking around for a long time. He could end up though being sort of like the Howard Dean kind of, the boomlet that comes up and then goes away really quickly. Just don't know. Yeah. You think he's gonna stay around longer if you had to guess?
My suspicion is he's a shooting star.
Okay,
so
that'd be my guess. I think Biden and Bernie will stay ahead of him quite a bit. We'll see. It's very interesting. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support.